Okay, so today we're going to be working with choosing a method for solving quadratic equations. And that's basically what it means is when you get a quadratic equation and the question is whether it's a word problem or just a regular, solving, calculating problem, you're going to have to try to figure out which method you're going to go. And these are the three basic ones. You're going to maybe try to factor it, find the zeros. You're going to try and complete the square, uh, which will be affected by the leading coefficient if it's equal to 1, and the leading coefficient if it's not equal to 1. And that's the second method in your bag of tricks if you want. The first, the second, and then the third is using the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So these are your basic three things. Now, usually how people use this is they try to factor, and if it's giving them a hard time, then they either go to completing the square or using the quadratic formula. There's no exact way to do this. You don't have to go step 1, try step 2, and then go to step 3. You can go step 1 and 3 if you're more comfortable. There's always pluses and minuses, positive and negatives, right? This is usually the easiest one to remember. There's no memorizing. You just have to create your two parentheses and try to figure this out. This works really well unless you have a square root involved, and then it gets tricky. When you get a square root involved, you usually have to go to here or to here. The positive of this is you don't have to memorize a big formula, but there are two small formulas you need to look at and to remember, which we'll go over as I go over the example. And then the quadratic formula is, it works for everything, but the only problem is you got to remember this big formula. So those are the three methods. They have their pluses, they have their minuses. I'm going to go over the exact example using all three, so you can see maybe where you get stuck on something, why you would continue on to the next one, or you'll notice how when you do it correctly, it works out and you get the same answer over and over again. So let's go ahead and change this. The first one we're going to do is factor the quadratic equation. So I'm going to use my trusty pencil because that way if I mess up, I don't have to worry about it too much. We're going to look at 2x squared and we're going to look at 3. So 2x squared is going to give me 2x times x. It's the only way. Now I could write x times 2x, whatever. I'm just doing it by order, largest, smaller. 2x times x will give me the 2x squared. Now my back numbers should give me 3. That's 1 times 3 or 3 times 1. Now they could both be positive, and because this is positive 3, they could also both be negative, because negative 1 times negative 3 is going to give me positive 3. So the way we figure out which way it goes is, remember, look at your middle term. If that's positive, these two must be positive. So I'm going to write plus 1 plus 3. When I do that, I got to figure out if my middle term turns 8. And the way I do is a happy little rainbow, which is going to give me 1x. Okay, those are the inners from FOIL, and the outers, a big happy face, because we're all happy to do algebra, 6x. Okay, when I add these two, I get 7x, not 8x. That's not what I want. So let me switch it around. I'm going to put the 3 and the 1. 3 and 1. And look at how it affects it. 3x, 2x times 1, 2x. When I add these two, I get 5x. I'm still not at the 8x. At this point, I mean, I can start switching it around but the only problem is the 3, there's only two combinations of two numbers that I multiply that will give me 3. 1 times 3 and 3 times 1, not including fractions and decimals and all that stuff and square roots. So at this point, I would probably say there's more than likely a hidden something hidden in here that we can't find easily. So this is where it works really nice to either complete the square or use the quadratic formula. So this is where I would say to myself, I probably want to go to something else. So let's look at it using something else. Now let's first look at completing the square. When we complete the square, if my leading coefficient is 1, I'm good to go and I can start. But if it's not 1, to make sure it's a perfect square, and 2 is not a perfect square. So I am going to have to multiply everything by 2. Because 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 is a very small number, and it is a perfect square. So I'm going to multiply everything by 2. And I get 4x squared. Notice I got my pencil out. Plus 16x plus 6 equals 0. Okay? 2 times 2, 4. 2 times 8, 16. Oops, I ate the x. Let me put it there. And 2 times 3 is 6, equal to 0. Okay? Now we want to complete the square. I have to move this 6 over. Okay? And I get 4x squared plus 16x. I'm going to have to put something here, minus 6. Okay? To complete the square. The formula when your coefficient is not equal to 1, to figure out what's in here, okay, and I'm going to write this in red, or let me just use purple. If the leading coefficient is 1, we use this little magical formula, b over 2a squared. We would take our b, divide it by 2, and square it. But my coefficient is not 1, it's 4. That's when the leading coefficient is not equal to 1. Let me get a different color. I'll use orange. If it's not equal to 1, we have to use a different form. B squared over 4a. Okay? So, since this is 4 and that's not 1, I have to use this. Let me write it over here. B squared, 4a. Now, let's make sure that we get this right. This is my a, that's my b. My b squared would be, and I'm going to write this just like that. I'm not even going to multiply it yet. Okay, because I'm going to hope that things cancel out. So there's my 4. 16 times 16, that's the b squared. 4. And my a is 4. And lo and behold, look how lucky we got. 16 times 16, 4 times 4 is 16. These cancel out. So I can add 16 here and 16 here. And look what happens. I get, and I'm going to do this in black, 4x squared plus 16x plus 16 equals negative 6 plus 16, 10. Okay? Cool. Now we're ready to complete the square. I always like to do this because, and this 10, just leave it aside. Don't worry about it right now. Okay? What times what? Remember, these should be exactly alike because we're going to make them into a square. So what times what is 4? 2 times 2. What times what is x squared? X times x. What times what, which is the same number as 16? That the middle will be positive, would be positive 4, positive 4. Are they exactly alike? Let's check the middle term. 4 times 2x, 8x. Hey, 4 times 2x, another 8x. Is that 16x? Yep, we're good. Now I'm going to write it as a square. 2x plus 4 squared equals 10. All right. Now let's take the square root. I'm going to go crazy here and use the red. The square root of both sides gives me 2x plus 4 equals plus or minus. Remember, when we take the square root, we have to do plus or minus. It took me a long time to get to that. It's equal plus or minus the square root of 10. Cool. Now we're going to have to solve for x. The first thing we do is subtract 4 on both sides. Now, a helpful hint. Do not put this behind the radical. You want to put it in front, because if not, it's going to look like 104. Trust me, it happens every day. Plus or minus the square root of 10. And now I divide everything, because I have 2 terms here, divided by 2. X equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 10 over 2. How would that look? Well, it would be, these are my 2 possible solutions. Negative 2 plus the square root of 10 over 2, and negative 2 minus the square root of 10 over 2. And now, when I do my quadratic formula, I should find these 2 as the solution. But that's how you do, is completing the square. All right, so let's go to the quadratic formula. Hopefully I didn't mess up, right? Okay, so my quadratic formula, I need to figure out my a, my b, and my c. A, what's my a? That's the first number in the leading coefficient. A is 2. What's my b? Second number, or second term, leading coefficient, a. What's my c? The constant 3. Now I'm going to use all of these. The black will be what doesn't change. And these I'm going to put in the number so you can see exactly where it's coming from. So negative. What's my b? Purple? Negative 8 plus or minus the square root of, my b is also 8, squared minus 4. A is 2. C is 3. Let me make this a little bit bigger. All over 2, and my A is, what's my A? Oh, 2. Okay, so you can see all the numbers and see where they go. That doesn't change. The black is non-changing. The colors are depending on your quadratic equation. All right, let's simplify this. We're going to start what's inside the square root. Okay, so I'm going to change this to black. Negative 8 plus or minus 64. 8 times 8. 8 squared is 64 minus 8 times 3, 24. All over 4. Let's keep subtraction. 2 times 2 is 4. 64 minus 24. Negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 40 divided by 4. All right, we're good. Now this is why we were having so much trouble over there when we were trying to factor it out. We need to figure out what the square root of 40 is. So I need to whip out my factor tree. 40. You can do 8 times 5. You can do 4 times 10. You can do 10 times 2 times 2, whatever you want. I'm going to use 4 times 10. And because they're not, I can still break it down, right? These are not prime numbers. So 4 is 2 times 2, and 10 is 2 times 5. No matter what two numbers you put here, if you keep breaking it down, you're going to get this. 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. All right, I'm going to put that inside the square root. Okay, so I just substituted this with this. This has no index, so I'm looking for pairs. I'm looking for groups of 2. This is 2 times 2. I can take that out. I'm left with 2 times 5, which are not the same number, so they stay in there. And it's 2 square roots of 10. So I get negative 8 plus or minus 2. Negative 8. I'm sorry, that's divided by 4 because the whole thing is divided by 4. So negative 8 divided by 4. And this is 2 square roots of 10 divided by 4. Negative 8 divided by 4 is negative 2 plus or minus. Now, 2 divided by 4. Another way to write 4 is 2 times 2. If I have a 2 on the bottom and a 2 on the top, guess what? I can cancel them out. And I'm left with 2 on the bottom, which gives me square root of 10 over 2. Okay? How do we write this? 2 ways. Negative 2 plus the square root of 10 over 2, and negative 2 minus square root of 10 over 2. And that's the exact same answer we got from completing the square. This looks like a little less work. It's really just a matter of style, whatever you're more comfortable with. I hope this helps. Obviously, when you're doing the completing the square, you don't have to make it a perfect square if the leading coefficient is 1. That's the only difference with this. But it's the same thing, guys. I hope this helps, and good luck.